Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Adwoa podcast, where we have candid conversations with migrants or children of migrants who are doing very well in their careers. We get to dive deep into their journey, their lives, their careers, and hopefully we get to inspire a few dreamers along the way. Today, we are joined by the fantastic creative couple behind Adecher Atelier, Solomon and Adwoa.
Hello.
Yes.
Hi.
Welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having us.
This creative couple strives to bring African mythology, folklore, and culture to life through their art, which has been featured at the BBC, the South Bank Center. I'm sure I'm missing a lot of places right now. Blanking.
That's okay.
But you're doing your thing. You have over 500,000 followers across platforms.
Yeah.
And this is just the beginning.
Yeah.
So I figured we should have a conversation and to kind of figure out who you are and what you do. So let's start from the beginning. Where were you born?
Ooh.
Do you want to do first?
You can start.
I was born in England, in Harrow. To be specific, Norfolk Park Hospital.
Okay.
But I was born here in the UK.
Yeah, I was born in Nigeria, Lagos.
Lagos, Nigeria.
Yeah.
You're a true Niger boy.
Okay.
That's cool. And then, how was your upbringing? How was your childhood? And how did that kind of inform what you do now?
Well, truth be told, so I moved here when I was around 6 years old to London. Don't have too many memories of back in Nigeria, if I'm honest. I have like one or two memories, but I think it's sort of interesting because I can still remember the difference as of living in Nigeria and sort of like living here. The difference between, I guess, family and sort of like how things just felt around.
Right.
And then I guess it's also the difference in just like language and what you hear around you, which is interesting. Still spoke English, like half English, half Yoruba back in Nigeria. But yeah, I guess when we came here, it's just full sort of like English.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I mean, we can talk more about that because I feel like it's one of those things where as we try to assimilate, sometimes we try to let go, like, you know what I mean, where we came from, I guess, and the language and all the other things. And I think what tends to happen, like after, I don't know, a decade or two, or just time has passed, you're like, man, I don't know why I felt I needed to do that.
I mean, I know why. Probably is because, like, yeah, as you said, you sort of need to assimilate, and especially when we're younger, having an accent was an easy way to be picked on.
Right.
Yeah.
So it was, the attempt was to try to lose an accent as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Although it's different now, I would say.
Mm-hmm. But it's one of the things that I want to change. Also, not change, but I want to see. I hopefully we get to do differently, right? Because I think I care so much about immigration identity because I know what it's like. I left as well when I was young. I was a kid, so I know what it's like to try and fit in, and also to eventually figure out that you don't really fit in either space because you're to this or to that. You don't really fit in. It's quite interesting, but I think that it doesn't have to be one or the other. You can just embrace both identities because I think it's a superpower in a sense, because you have different perspectives. You were brought up with certain morals and values, and you can kind of bring both worlds together, not just as an individual, but also through your work, right? Because you have so much wealth of history and perspective, and but that's we'll get to that. So then, how did you guys get into African mythology? What what inspired you? What is African mythology in your perspective, and why get into it?
So I feel like describing what African mythology is would be here for ages because it's an interesting one. So the word African, it implies that we're looking at the whole continent, like all the 54 countries, and then within those countries there's a lot of regions, there's a lot of different tribes and cultures. In Nigeria alone, there's so many different tribes that each have their own pantheons and spiritualities and stuff. So it is definitely an umbrella term that we use to kind of just describe the spirituality and the stories throughout the continent of Africa. And also using the word mythology, it's kind of like at the intersection between spirituality and history and folklore.
Right.
So it doesn't necessarily imply falsehood. Like some people might think, oh, it's a myth, so it doesn't mean it's true. But the thing about mythology is that it's always kind of attached to some sort of spiritual or cosmological system in some sort of way. It's just the way that, our ancestors, used to interpret the sky. Why are there stars in the sky?
Right.
And, they'll think of a reason. Why is there rainbows? Why do we have weather? And that's just kind of what it is, yeah.
Yeah, mythology is, traditional stories of origin.
Yeah.
And as Andrew said, it's how we explain the world. And the reason why it's so important to us is, I guess, as you grow up, you realize that we easily and readily consume other cultures, mythology, stories, histories, faiths and cultures. But when it comes to ours, in terms of like African as a whole, we tend not to delve into it. And the reason why is, I guess, one, lack of access, two, the demonization of anything African and sort of like putting anything African to evil, which does a lot of damage. Not enough people are talking about it or ready to talk about it.
That's what I want to talk about. I'm curious about it because I think even Africans do it.
Exactly.
Especially
Africans. And it's because we don't recognize the damage that colonialism has done to traditional identity, stories, cultures, because we've now moved to a post-colonial era where, and the narratives and the stories that we're told is almost like our history starts at colonialism, our cultures start at colonialism, and then the damage that can do to a young person's identity, thinking that, one, Black people or Africans didn't have these stories to explain the world in the same way other cultures do. And it says that, African people didn't have complex thoughts, reasons of explaining the world. And you might, people might think, oh yeah, it's just mythology, it's just stories. Why is that important? How we think of the world, how we think our ancestors, how our people think of the world is deeply important to having that respect for our culture, respect for traditions, and respect to see how we understood the world. So that's why it's important.
And the sense of self as well, I think, isn't it? Because I'm a storyteller. We love stories because we see ourselves in the stories, right? So if you grew up hearing and listening about stories from people that look like you, sound like you, then it's empowering, right? And so many of us grow up and we're so familiar with the kings and queens of England and Spain, and we're so familiar with Greek mythology and all the the Roman gods. But some of us have chosen not to really learn about our own, which I think in some ways is a bit of a shame,
It's a massive shame.
But I think like with everything, now there's this huge opportunity to really tell the world about it and to help bring that to the forefront in a positive light, And I think there's a lot more of that happening right now. And I think that's what you guys are doing as well,
And the interesting part about it, or the difficult part, is that you can't just start with these stories just because of so much damage has sort of been done with the narratives of things, that you almost have to first, what we found is that we kind of have to unpick the disinformation that has been done, decolonize people's understanding of things, because the starting point isn't sort of like the same now. It's almost like you're starting with negative perspectives. You almost have to do the work to unlearn that first, and then start, or at the same time teaching those lessons as well. Because you can't have one without the other. Unfortunately, we wish we could. We wish that everyone could just,
accept it and just consume it.
Accept it, and then also allow us to playfully play with fantasy, playfully play with sort of like stories and all these ideologies in the same way other cultures are able to now. But because of so much damage has sort of been done, you sort of have to do that work to decolonize that and sort of establish that level of respect.
Which is why I think, we need all kinds of artists. You guys paint and you guys also do talks, and I think there's room for that. But if you're telling stories, then you have the room to kind of have these conversations within stories, which I'm really passionate about. And hopefully we get to do more of it. But so, how did you guys get into it?
into
mythology and
so we both, growing up in London, UK, we both had a big interest in Greek mythology, Roman mythology. We loved watching and reading Percy Jackson, Hercules, all of that stuff. But one day we were just like, wait, how come we don't know anything about any of the deities or the pantheons from Ghana, from Nigeria? So we just started to look it up, and then we kind of unlocked this whole world of like stories from the African continent that we could relate to, that we could share names with, that we could recognize. And we were like, nobody knows this. So we kind of took it upon ourselves to like start creating art that surrounded those stories and explains the figures, and put a conceptual face to like a name. And then we just started sharing it with people on socials, and it kind of went from there, really.
Yeah, honestly, like as we were learning, we decided it first literally just started as us learning it to be able to enrich our art, with a bit more depth, rather than saying, we've painted this person that's in flames. Like, we didn't want to say, oh yeah, that's Aries, or we didn't want to just attach it to, and that's what a lot of stories do. They sort of now have black characters, and they sort of just attach it to already Western notions. But learning the more authentic, traditional stories, mythologies, it can add that level of depth, give context to a character, and allows a character to be more nuanced and rooted in context. And that's what we sort of want to move towards, rather than us saying, oh, there's a lack of diversity, let's just make a character black or whatever. It's more, let's actually think about what makes a culturally relevant character. What different morals and stories can you get from the continent that can enrich and give us lessons for now that haven't been unlocked, haven't been tapped in the same way that we've done for all other cultures. And as we started exploring that more, we realized how important it is to learn more, and the lack of that kind of information there is in the, especially in the global space, in the global media.
That's you get to add story to it, right? You get to add depth, and the more specificity you have, the more interesting it is for people to look at, right? Because I assume if I didn't know anything about African mythology and I saw this, I don't know, a black man with flames, instead of just being told this is Black Zeus or something, if I actually heard about the stories and the history behind him and the myth, then I would be even more excited and more interested, more curious about it. Because I think there's so much there. I think there's so much in African history, African mythology. There's so much that's just untapped. So it's very exciting. Now, had you guys always done art before you guys got into this? What was like your journey into it?
So we were both separate artists when we met, but we actually were also in university when we met, studying architecture. So we actually met at an art gallery when we were like exhibiting our work as individual artists. We always had that interest in art, and even our separate art was always focused on the Black narrative and empowering Black people. Like mine was always centered around strong Black women. That's what I took, and then yours was always like centered around strong Black leaders, like MLK Jr. and stuff like that. So we always had that kind of synergy with our art anyway. But I think when we came together, it kind of took it to that next level of like uncovering people that no one's heard of, like deities and stuff. So
Now, did you notice the art first? The artist. Now you can be honest now. Maybe she was like, "Oh, who's this artist?" Did you do that? Okay.
I'll say both. But I think because we were in like the same sort of like circle, so we kept meeting in different ways and different situations, and then we started getting talking from there. But it's it was meant to be, and when your passions and sort of the mission aligns, you sort of just run with it from there. And that's what it's been.
That's good. That's wonderful. But then, how did you individually get into art? What what drew you to art in the first place, and how did you kind of, because it's a whole journey thing. I think to also just say I'm an artist is a thing you have to own, and you have to like, I think in many ways you have to work your way up to. So like, what drew you to art individually? How did you get into it? What did your parents say when you said, "Oh, I want to be an artist"?
So yeah, I feel like I've always been creative. I've always been, drawing. I did art GCSE and A level. Actually, my parents were very supportive. My dad literally like built a shed for me in our garden and like went out with me to buy loads of different paints and stuff like that. So they've always been supportive. My mum took me to some art classes, like all that. So it's been great to have like supportive African parents when it comes to like careers that are creative, because you don't usually get that. I mean, I still did architecture, so. But yeah, I've always been really creative, and I've always liked the idea of representation and representing people that are severely underrepresented. And for me, that was Black women in art. So you go to galleries, you don't really see a lot of people like us or Black women being shown in art. So that's where I took that interest from, and that's what I wanted to do. Yeah.
I would say art was the first time that I think I felt, when you get praised for something. I think it's my first memory of like doing something, creating something, and then everyone just being like blown away by it. And I think that sort of gratification sort of has propelled me to this day. But yeah, I think it was, definitely supported heavily by my parents as well, especially my dad, because he loved art. He loves to tell me that he was an artist as well. He studied like art history in Nigeria and sort of thing. So we talk about it every now and then, especially now that I'm older.
Yeah.
And we're sort of like doing works on like African history, culture. Very interesting.
He loves to tell
stuff. Tell extra information and sort of like added context. Which is honestly great, because not everyone gets that opportunity to be able to learn more from their parents, especially on this topic, because the generation was. I feel like they sort of like didn't want to have much to do with anything like traditional, religion or spirituality or practice or.
Some of it is that, that brainwashing was very strong. Yeah, but I think it's also a blessing though to be able to have something like that to bond with your parents with.
Exactly.
Yeah, what would you say were some of your first wins in your careers as artists? Some of the first highlights, that if you remember, both as individuals and then as a couple.
Should we start with individuals?
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess as individuals, I did some art for this clothing company. It was during when the whole Black Lives Matter movement was like really going on around 2020. So I forgot the name of the company now. It's an American one, so it could annoy me. But I designed some clothing to kind of help with the proceeds to support Black people in America that were facing different atrocities, and that was really cool because it was like a tracksuit top and bottom, and it was like loads of like NFL players bought it and stuff like that. So it was really nice to see like my art on something that was also making a difference and going towards a really good movement. Yeah, apart from that, I feel like different exhibitions around London have been definitely highlights of my old past solo career.
I would say mine is, I guess one is being able to sell art to so many different people, because so my type of work was like portraiture, like realism, photorealism sort of portraits, and sort of like people came to me with like different stories or different things or people that they wanted to sort of like memorize, more so like with a drawing. And I think one of the most touching ones was one where his brother just like recently passed away, and he wanted a picture to remember that. And I remember doing this drawing and picking the picture for it, and the one that he picked had this like the biggest smile you could ever see. And one of the things that sort of he said when he saw the drawing after was that he was just like so happy to be able to remember his brother in this way with this big smile, and how he was just loving and happy. And those are the kind of stories that you get to sort of like have when you're doing these kind of portraits. You touch people's lives and they sort of like want something that captures a story, captures a person's essence. So yeah, really enjoyed that. And then second was being on TV. I was on a show, Drawers Off, which was cool. It's like a Come Dine With Me, but with live drawing.
On Channel 4.
So I got to be a model and also draw.
He just dropped that a little bit, you know. That's cool. And then, so individually, and then as a couple, as Adecher.
Oh yeah, definitely. Our collaboration with the National Gallery, that was like a highlight forever, I think. So we got commissioned to do 2 paintings for them for their 200th birthday, and I think that whole process and that whole relationship we now have with them is definitely a massive career highlight, especially as artists and as content creators as well, and also as people who are trying to bring these stories into like, you know, a mainstream world. National Gallery is like a really big institution in London, and you know, if you go to the gallery, it's all filled with like, you know, white people, Greek mythology, Roman mythology. There's no like black stories. That's because the collection stops at a certain point in history, so, and it's British history. But we were like trying to bring, you know, African stories to an institution that, you know, doesn't necessarily focus on that, and to an audience that might not even know it exists. So that was a really great opportunity for us.
And I guess mine would be our first solo exhibition that we did at the Oxford in South Bank. And the reason why that was because we managed to put a really strong body of work together, you know, narrating different stories around the continent. And it was just seeing the people come in and sort of like resonate so heavily with the, you know, learning about the different cultures, stories, mythologies, and being empowered with it. And one of my favorite sort of memories was when like a lady came in with her daughter, and just like pointing at it. I was like, look, see, there's black fairies, you know, and sort of like she really like lit up seeing it. And it's just to show that representation is important, you know, seeing yourselves in these stories is important, and being able to see them depicted as you. You know, these kinds of things are really important to not just us growing up, but even us as adults and, you know, even an older generation, to be able to see this gives you hope, gives you joy, gives you fantasies, gives you all of these other things that I don't think we've managed to get as much as you know, in the mainstream media, because most of our depictions is just trauma after trauma after.
I know. You don't have to tell me about it. That's one of the things. It's one of the things that used to drive me crazy, and it's one of the things that I wanted to see differently growing up, because I was like, oh, I want to watch a movie with like an African hero, an African prince, you know, an African king, and I want to see myself on screen. Like I want to see people with my features on screen being portrayed in a positive light, you know. And it was just very frustrating that it wasn't happening, but it is changing though. It is changing. Well, thanks to people like you, you know? So that's great. Were there people along the way that kind of helped mentor you, kind of helped kind of push you along, or kind of give you an opportunity? And how important was it for your careers, both as individuals and as a couple?
I would say, as an individual, one of the biggest sort of parts of my journey and sort of development was, so I was part of this organization called the Amos Bursary. And so the bursary is sort of aimed at, you know, young academically gifted black kids from sort of like public schools sort of settings, but who did really well academically, and sort of helped us with, you know, the softer skills in, you know, in life, you know, in terms of like, you know, networking, you know, communication skills, understanding more about self-development, giving us mentors and sort of like putting us in different settings. And this was such a big part of, you know, my development, because I got, you know, when I was younger, I was a lot more shy, introverted, but through this and seeing all these other amazing people and getting access to these powerful mentors, you sort of gain this confidence. You learn how to speak, take up space in different places, and that's so valuable to, I guess, to me as a sort of an introverted person who had, you know, academically gifted but didn't know how to properly navigate the world. So yeah, I think that was probably the biggest part of my development growing up.
I feel like mine's the complete opposite. Because growing up, the area I grew up in was very like white.
Mhm.
And it was, you know, some people say posh, I don't think it was that posh.
Gosh.
But so I've never had a mentor, I've never had a black teacher ever in my life. Like, so I've not had, you know, opportunity to, you know, be guided through life by like a, you know, a mentor or a teacher figure in that way. So I don't know. I don't know how I'd answer that question then, for me personally.
Because I find that most artists, most creatives, it's not just creatives,
Yeah.
but find that the ones that eventually really find a way and make a way for themselves, there's often this, it's a myth in my opinion, that like you can do it on your own and you can, you know what I mean? Like you don't need anyone. But I think there's often usually someone or like an institution or organization that's been there that give you an opportunity or that just give you a chance or and I think it's important for young people to know that you can't really do it on your own. Yes,
Definitely.
there are things that you can do. Of course, you have to be disciplined, you have to be self-motivated and all these things, but you have to be open to the world also kind of lending you a hand.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
And
completely agree with that. You know, definitely, you know, having that sort of like tribe around you, getting that community with you. It might not be people that you might directly sort of like know, but it might be people that you see and sort of like can see some good qualities in that you sort of want to emulate, which is why it's good to have, you know, good role models, good figures in life, not just for one thing, but different aspects, because no one's perfect and you shouldn't try to emulate one person perfectly. But if you see different people who might be doing things that you might want to see yourselves in or have different qualities that you see that you would love to sort of like have, I think, you know, it's worth definitely having, you know, people that you look up to, different people that you can sort of like see yourself sort of like as, and then understand maybe what makes them who they are,
right.
And sort of like study that. But I'm just saying that caveat in it that there's no one that's perfect. There's no one that you should, you know, worship or idolize as if they're nothing more than human. And you pick the good in the people that you sort of want to emulate, because I've seen lots of people go down the route of, oh, this person's my idol, this person is perfect, and you'll find many people are not perfect.
I know. I've never really had that. I think we have to be like careful of that. I admire achievements that people have. You know, I admire aspects of people's lives. You know, but not them, because they're just they're primates. In my opinion, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah. For me, it's really about what they've been able to achieve, what they've done, and like that is something that I want to do myself, or you know, how they create art, how they perform. Like these things are things that I definitely admire about people. But you gotta be careful about idolizing people, and I think that's one of the things that also you realize as a kid growing up, like that moment you start seeing your parents as real people, you know?
Oh, yeah. You're like, okay, right. And then as you're growing up, you're like, life is hard.
We're all just experiencing life for the first time, so you know, nobody's perfect.
Exactly, and you realize that sometimes that they were also really young.
I know.
Yeah.
And you're like, wait, I'm the age that they were when they had like 5 kids or whatever. Like,
that's
damn.
crazy.
Yeah.
Y'all did that.
I know. And they always, I mean, they did so much, man. And this is just like a generation or two. I think about like how much people have had to endure, you know? And now some of us we complain and we have a much easier life than they ever did. So what advice would you give a young artist that's starting out, you know, that's like, oh, I want to get 300,000 followers like that. I mean, I want to do all these things. What would you tell them? What should they do? What advice would you give them? Or what would you have wished someone had told you?
I'd say persistence is key, definitely. You know, there'll be setbacks, there'll be achievements, but you shouldn't let your setbacks stop you from, you know, pursuing your goals. Because, you know, there's a lot of times where you might think, oh, I don't know, I applied to this, you know, art fair or this exhibition and didn't get in, or I applied to this course or this prize and I didn't get in. Like, there's a lot of times where you can use that as an excuse to stop you from, you know, doing what you want to do, but the goal is always bigger than that. And I just feel like persistence always pays off in the end. It could take 5 years, it could take a month, it could take 10 years, but you know, you will always see some sort of reward for the hard work that you put into things.
Honestly, what I was saying, the things that you do when no one's watching
Yeah.
are as important as the things that you do when you're in the spotlight. And sometimes, honestly, all the work that you might be doing, you think, oh, no one's seeing it. And there's lessons that we're still learning to this day, because you're constantly learning, constantly reviewing your life. And the times when you think, oh, this isn't doing well, or oh, no one's seeing it, no one's appreciating the work. Keep showing up, keep doing that work. Do it for yourself, because you're growing every time you're making a body of work. You're growing every time, you're doing something, you're out there, you put it out, you learn something, you do something else. Those things are as important as when one of those opportunities meets the right people, meets the right, exposure, it goes viral or whatever. Then you have the right character, you have the right, experience to be able to utilize that properly. And then, there's times that, for example, we've gone viral and we hadn't done, we didn't have the infrastructure or the right things behind the page to be able to, oh yeah, you can also do, watch all of this. And so it was just, so then what happens that it's one thing that's gone viral and you're like, oh yeah, this is great. What else is there? What else do you want people to take from what you're doing? It's not about being viral. It's about the impact that you can create. It's about the other works that you have that people can sort of have that curated understanding, learning. And that's sort of what we've done now. It's not we're looking for one thing to go viral. It's that we know that wherever you are on the page, even if it's only 10 people that are watching it, you would enjoy what you're learning, you'll enjoy what you're watching, and you'll connect with something. So yeah, it's something that you kind of have to learn, especially exploring this social media age. It's not about how viral you are, it's not about how many followers you have necessarily, it's about the impact that you've decided to make on this world. And that's why you should have more followers, because you're making that impact, not the other way around.
What are some of the things that you find challenging while navigating social media?
I think you can't control people's perception of you.
Right.
So, you can put out a video that you think, in your lens is one way, but someone can view it a completely different way. Like sometimes we post videos, our educational ones, and someone will comment something and it's like, I wouldn't even think to take that away from the video. I wouldn't even think, do you know what I mean? So it's like, everyone has their own ways of viewing stuff and everyone has their own perceptions and conclusions that they can come to. And I think if you're going to be on social media, you need to understand that there's potential for at least, I don't know how many people there are on this earth, billions of people to see your one video. And so many people will take different things from it and you can't control that. So as long as it's authentic to you, and you're putting out the right message that you want to put out, I think that's the best thing you can do. Yeah.
I can't remember who said it, but someone said that as an artist, all you can do is serve the food and let people eat it however they want.
Yeah.
And it's the idea that, as artists, we create works, you can allow people to connect with it however they want to.
Yeah.
And I guess the second thing about the social media thing is that there are people out there that are just there are people that are negative.
Yes.
They're just negative.
Just negative for the sake of
and they have nothing else to do.
Yeah.
Don't let that get to you as much as it does. And it's so easy to have 100 good comments, seeing that one negative one and hyperfixate on that, because we're not used to seeing negativity and not being able to confront it. If someone came to my face and said something negative, I'll be able to confront it straight away. But when you're seeing, negative things online, you sort of will hyperfixate on it, and that's not conducive to, the landscape that we're sort of in. Because one, you've done so much good, so make sure that you see anything negative in the context of all the good that it's in, and then two, just make sure you don't take everything personally, because some people's mission online is to make other people miserable.
Yeah.
So don't fall victim to that, I would say.
Yeah. What would you say is very different in your approach to what you do on social media now than when you first started? I mean, I know you kind of touched upon that a little bit, but what would you say? Was there something that really drastically changed the way you looked at it or the way you looked at approaching social media?
I would say an understanding of, I guess we understood what the mission sort of was on social media. Because I guess at first and this is normal for me, when you're out there on social media, it's for you want to get famous, you want to go viral, you want all these people to see you, you want your art to be out there so that people can sort of see it. And that's sort of the lens in which you create. And then, there was a shift that sort of happened where it was more, the mission's more important than us being out there.
Right.
It's the stories, the people, because people started connecting with these stories. People were empowered by it. People wanted to learn more about themselves, the continent, and other people. That became more important than us just saying, "Oh yeah, we want our art to be out there so we can make money or whatever."
It became bigger than us. It's like it's no longer this self-serving thing that we're just doing for ourselves. It's like we're doing it for everyone. We're doing it for the diaspora like us that want to connect more with their heritage. We're doing it for the African Americans who maybe just found out where they're from and they want to connect with that. We're doing it for the Africans, for the Brazilians. It's just way more than just serving us. Yeah.
So it's sort of like more of a community first approach.
Yeah, for sure.
And that is sort of like seen in sort of like the topics we might choose to then cover, the comments that we sort of get and engage with. That's the approach that you sort of want to be taking. You're serving the community rather than you're trying to exploit or take from other people.
Yeah.
And that's honestly the biggest difference that sort of you can see from sort of like when we started, when it was just telling stories and or doing our drawings and putting it out there. And now it's, what do people need to learn? What do people need to know? What's the most important things for the community? And then that's sort of like the areas that we're navigating around now.
Yeah, just making it about everything except yourself.
Although I would say we still do have ourselves in it.
Yeah, because the community is us, in a way. Like it's a reflection of us because we're one and the same. So in that way, it kind of comes full circle.
You're doing it, so it comes from you.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to be funny, but.
And what's also interesting about that is also us putting our faces in it more. Because when we started, it was just time lapse of us drawing all that. But people sort of need to connect with who's saying the message as well. So you see our faces in a lot more videos than it was at the start.
Yeah.
And it's sort of putting ourselves out there. But then also we're not only just making education content, we're also putting our lifestyles, ourselves out there more. And the reason why is one, it's the same thing that people don't see black couples a lot.
Right.
And that's the honest truth. And people don't know what black love looks like. There's so much discourse that's more negative around, what it means to be black in a relationship and all of that sort of noise. So as important as it is for people to learn about, all these stories and education thing, I think it's also important for people to know, black love exists and it's beautiful. Melanated people are beautiful out there and there's all that joy that comes with it. So, adding that to the narrative of the community that we're creating, I think adds that holistic approach. So you're here for everything.
Also, I know you guys paint together on the same canvas.
Yes.
So it's a labor of love in many different ways. That's good. Now back to African mythology. What would you say is different between African mythology and, let's say, Roman mythology, or what would you say is similar? Why should I be interested in African mythology? As someone who knows nothing about it, if I knew nothing about it, why would I look into it?
I'd say firstly because it's very underrepresented. The stories within the continent, within the different pantheons, they are very similar to the Roman and the Greek and the Shinto pantheons, and I think that's also what's beautiful about it. So if you enjoy reading about Zeus and Medusa and Aphrodite and all those people, then hands down there's no reason for you not to enjoy learning about Shango or Shun, because their traits are very similar. The only difference is being from the African continent, there's slightly different characteristics, and the terminologies and context is very different as well. But when it comes down to it, the characteristics and the people are very similar, because we're all humans, we all experience life in the same base ways. We experience jealousy, we experience love, hate, and it's just different ways of interpreting that.
I would say growing up you hear quite a lot of this African proverb, this African wisdoms and aphorisms, and they're always so profound in the way of understanding. And the reason why African mythology, cultures, folklores and all that are really interesting, and why you should look more into them, is because these stories have these proverbs, these wisdoms embedded into them, these morals embedded into them. And And I think that's why it's worthwhile learning, because you can learn so much about the world, learn so much wisdom, learn so much about character and morality in general through these stories in ways that other cultures might have them, different things that they're trying to say, different contexts, different stories, different takeaway messages from them. African mythologies, stories, they have certain characters, morals that they're trying to get at as well. So it's having a more holistic understanding of the world and enriching your knowledge in different perspectives. That's why African mythology is so important. That's why these stories are so important to your education, I would say.
And there's like a lot of beautiful concepts as well that kind of change your way of thinking about life and death, and if there's an afterlife or not, if there's a God or not. And it's just, it really opens up your mind from this linear thinking to from learning about it, I just feel like I've even changed as a person and my perceptions of life and how I have my own outlook on life, and it's really cool.
I find that when you read about different myths, you get into a different culture, you're learning about the people, really.
Exactly.
You're learning about how they see the world, how they see themselves in the world, and you learn about their values and their morals. So in many ways, you're not really learning about the myth, you're learning about the people behind the myth, which is so fascinating. Now, is there a myth, or is it like a god or a deity that you really love, that you always like to share, or is there one that like fascinates you, or that you think, I'm sure there's many.
I think we rotate around so much. Every interview, every podcast, every time we sort of talk about it, there'll be a different one that we might be talking about. And I think that's the beauty of it, because the continent is so large, the stories are so complex and fun to learn, that there'll definitely be a new one each time.
I'd definitely say one of our favourites is the story of Eshu. So Eshu is a Yoruba Orisha, and he has been heavily misunderstood, and some people think he's the devil. He's not though, but it's due to Christian missionaries coming over to Nigeria and trying to find a way to dismantle their spirituality and bring Christianity to them. In that, Eshu was kind of translated as devil. So in the early Yoruba translated Bibles, the word Eshu would be in replace of devil. But he's actually the Orisha of the Guardian of the Crossroads. So he is a really pivotal Orisha, right? So
he's like one of the most important Orishas, because you can't talk to the other Orishas without going through Eshu. He's the Guardian of the Crossroads, the messenger. So you almost have to, normally you have to first sing praise to Eshu to unlock the doors to be able to communicate with the other Orishas. So how important is it demonize the one Orisha or God that is that
access.
The access to the rest of your spirituality. So that concept of why that was demonized and cutting that access away, it's more important than it's just a mistranslation.
It was purposeful.
It's very so the story of Eshu is such an important story, and he's such a really interesting character. He's
also likened to a trickster, sort of like Loki or Hermes or Nancy. So he kind of is in that ballpark as well. And do you want to tell the story?
And I guess what we'll say is that his stories are important because they teach us about morality, but also the agency of human choice. So he lets you learn your lessons. And that's quite important, because it's not that a trick means that someone's doing something evil to you. It's that you have two choices, like a crossroads. You can choose one or the other. The one that you choose has consequences. The one that you choose teaches you something about your character as well, and then you can learn from it. So the story that we really enjoy telling is this story of Eshu, who, one day he's in a village and he decides to paint himself half red, half black, straight down the middle, and he runs through this village, and the villagers, some on one side see him, they're like, oh, that is Eshu, a red god. On the other side, they're like, that's the black god. And so after he's gone, they talk to each other and say, oh yeah, Eshu's a red god. And the other side say Eshu's a black god. And they're like, no, what do you mean? He's definitely red, he's definitely black. And then they start fighting each other over it because these different perspectives. And what's really lovely about this story, interesting about this story, is that there's two endings that it normally has. One, Eshu comes back and says, look, this is what I've done. I paint myself half black, half red. So if you are taking the time to talk to each other, you'd have found out that, it's the same God, but you have different perspectives.
Yeah.
And you start understanding a holistic view of your God.
Mm-hmm.
And the other version of the story,
that Eshu just leaves them to it, and they just keep fighting it out, and nobody speaks to each other, and nobody ends up coming to the conclusion that they're still the same God but in different ways. And even the fact that there's two endings to the story is very Eshu-like. It's like, it could have happened this way, it could have happened that way, argue amongst yourselves which way it happened. And
you just go to the next village and does
and
the
then
same,
does it same for everyone.
So you have to learn that lesson the hard way, one way or another.
Yeah.
Which is why we really find it a really interesting story, because it's a story about perspective. It's a story about listening to one another.
Human nature as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's why it's such a powerful sort of like, it's a short story, but it's powerful in saying, let's talk to each other. Let's understand that we might not see the same thing, but we're understanding the same concept.
Yeah,
and
especially like now in the age of like social media, when there's so many different narratives about one specific thing, it's like, it's very important just to like communicate with each other and like, learn from each other and listen to each other's perspectives, because someone could look at like a picture and think it's blue, but someone else could think it's like, orange, and you just need to understand how, you come to that point of view.
Yeah, even going further with that, it's, for example, like sometimes we tell a story of, let's say it's, about a certain tribe, a certain god that's from a certain tribe. And what's interesting is that sometimes even people of the culture and traditions, they might not know the story in the same way. So they will definitely come really argumentative. No, it's not this, it's this, blah, blah, blah. And even people within that same comment would then say, no, it's like this. So within the same culture, you can have different stories, because folklore, folktales, it depends on who's saying it, the different messages they're trying to get out from it. But some people are so hard bent on saying that their way of understanding things is the only way to understand it. And you miss out the bigger picture, that there can be, a local representation of the same story in different parts of the tribe. And I think that's a more important message to sort of get out there, to see that yes, there might be differences, but we might be talking about the same concept. Yeah. And it's more beautiful to understand that than to fight over, oh yeah, this is the only right way.
Yeah, that little story actually can tell you so much about just human nature and like our tendencies and the way we kind of do things, right? There's so much there, right? There's what if it was done purposefully?
Exactly.
Because you know what I mean, to get people to fight so that they can be distracted by this, so that other thing could be happening. But that's another thing.
Depends who's telling the story. What your motive is. The story is.
So that's fascinating. Was there a story that you read, or was there something about a certain deity that you read that just like blew your mind in terms of you didn't expect it, or it changed your perspective on that specific people, that specific deity, or that, was there something that really kind of changed?
I would say it would be Mami Water.
I knew you were going to say it. I was going to say it too.
Yeah.
Definitely Mami Water.
Yeah. Do you want to say your reason?
What did you think before, and then what did you think after?
I think, if I can speak for both of us, like growing up, when you hear this Mami Water, it's like everyone thinks it's this big, bad boogeyman, scary figure. You can't even speak about it, let alone, look into it, because she's evil, But I think when we started researching her, it's actually very sad, because Mami Water is such an important figure, and there's so much you can learn from her or even then, because it's like Mami Water also represents a pantheon of deities. So, Oshun, Yemoya, they're also versions of Mami Water, and there's so much you can learn from each of them that it's really sad that, we've missed out on it as a culture, because we just automatically associate the word Mami Water with evil.
Yeah. Even if you break down the word, Mami Water, in terms of the etymology of it, it would be the mother of the waters. Yeah. And there's so much life in water, and every culture understands, water as this, life-giving sort of thing, and it's so important to life as a whole. Yeah, you can't live without water. So the idea of sort of like demonizing the concept of water itself sounds crazy to me. Yeah. And because so as we said, Mami Water can represent so many different deities in a bubble. So it's like you can't demonize all of that. Yeah. And we just found it so sad that is the only perception that people know of the concept of Mami Water. It's such a complex character, developed in different traditions, different cultures around the continent. So it's, finding that nuance in it, finding that understanding in it. And I think that was one of the reasons why we started seeing, okay, there's so much, decolonization that needs to happen. And there's so much more education and history that sort of needs to go along with the, understanding the telling of the stories.
Yeah, and I mean, even speaking of her, and speaking of that specific myth and also the others, it's so fascinating to me how the enslaved people of Africa actually took those myths with them. So Mami Wata looks so different in Cuba and Brazil, but she's still there, and that's it just speaks volume of, first of all, the strength of the people, but also the richness of the culture, but also the fact that it was so important to them, and it actually connects us in many ways, you know? And so I find that so cool, but also kind of heartbreaking at the same time, because again, it's vilified, it's demonized, and it's so untapped, but it's slowly changing.
It is, slowly.
Yeah, I also wanted to know about what are you guys looking forward to next? Is there a project that you guys really want to work on, or is it like a goal that you guys really want to achieve? What's like the next thing that you guys really want to do?
Yeah, so we're definitely working on our next big body of works. We'd love to do another massive exhibition, for sure. And we're also working on trying to put, all the educational stuff we've got out there in our artwork into a book that kind of just, explains everything we've learned about, and it's also a good resource for people to learn about the different African pantheons and folklore.
Yeah, exactly, because everyone's always asked, where's a good place to start? And there's so many different resources out there, and I think what's important for us is to be able to meet people at where they want to consume the information. So the reason why we think it's important for us to sort of like start writing a book for ourselves is to be able to communicate it in a way that so many more people can understand it, consume it, because some of these sort of like documents are, either they're dense, they're heavy to read, or they're very hard to access, academic papers or this kind of thing. So it's sort of finding a way to get all that information and make it easy to access for everyone in a way that they can say, oh yeah, okay, I've read this and now I know a bit more about, African history, culture, mythology, and these stories. So that's something that we're really excited to do.
Because it's really about accessibility and making sure that whether you're in Nigeria or you're in Birmingham or you're even in Cuba, Brazil, you can have access to a resource that has everything that we've learned about and that could enrich, your idea of the continent. That's, it's affordable, it's easy to understand, it's got some nice illustrations. Yeah, that's what we're working on.
And it shouldn't matter what your faith is, what you sort of believe in.
That's important.
It's important for us that everyone should be able to learn more about the culture, the worldviews, and how people experienced and understood the world. So I don't want people to use that as an excuse either.
No,
you often get that as an excuse. It's like, that's not good enough. Because sometimes people are often like, oh, I don't like to, read into all that because, I'm a Christian or whatever. But we're not asking you to change your spirituality or change your faith. We're asking you to, open up your mind and, access this wealth of knowledge that will actually, in turn, help you understand your heritage a bit better.
Oh yeah, I find that there's so much hunger for that. Especially after a couple of generations of people being here. There's this loss of connection with who they really are and where they come from, and oftentimes the language is lost. And there's no way to kind of go back, because it's often really hard after a couple of generations to go back to wherever you're from. So I think to have a platform, to have somewhere where people can be like, oh wow, this is my people, this is who we are, this is where we come from. And I find that people can be quite lonely, even though, we live in this, whether you're in America or in England or wherever, where there's so much abundance, but people are still so lonely and feel so lost, especially people who come from other places. So to have a place where they can go back to and just be like, oh man, they were cool, That's very nice. So where can people find you?
You can find us on most social media platforms at Adecher Atelier. You can find us on our website.
Adecher.com. YouTube, Adecher
Atelier.
And our podcast,
Afro Mythos. Patreon if you want to support with a bit of money.
Never hurts.
Yeah, you see our faces everywhere.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I think what you guys are doing is great, not just for the culture, but just also as inspiration for young people, for dreamers. I think, it's very hard for people to not see an example of where they can be, especially one that looks like them.
Yeah.
And there's been more and more of those, but I think to have young people like yourselves, having their work on the BBC, at the National Gallery, the Sampling Center, that's just so inspiring, and I think that's why I wanted to have a conversation with you guys, and to make people see that, like, listen, if they can do it, if they can do it,
Yeah.
and they're not, he wasn't born here, you may not have had all the relationships and all that, if they can do it, then anyone can do it, so just gotta keep at it.
Yeah.
And hopefully one day we'll be like you.
We believe in you.
Yeah. Thank you for coming, and I'll talk to you guys soon.
Thank you so much for having
Yeah,
us.
of course.